If you can translate this, I'll double your pay. Ethan Sterling's voice cut through the polished silence of the boardroom, dripping with mockery. His ice-blue eyes sparkled with a cruel kind of amusement as he lifted the sheet of paper, the words scrawled in faded ink across its surface. The laughter was immediate. Suits around the long mahogany table chuckled, some covering their mouths, others outright guffawing. They weren't laughing at Ethan. They were laughing at the woman standing awkwardly by the door, clutching a mop handle with both hands as though it were the only thing anchoring her in place. Naomi Carter stood there, her gray uniform dampened at the knees, dark curls escaping from the bun she had hastily tied at the start of her shift. Her warm brown eyes flickered between the page in Ethan's hand and the smirks circling the table. She hadn't asked to be part of this spectacle. She was just cleaning the glass walls of the conference room when Ethan Sterling noticed her, and decided to make her a prop in his little show. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, the perfect picture of control. His navy suit was sharp, his jawline clean, and his posture relaxed in a way that suggested ownership of not just the room, but the city skyline that glittered behind him. "Well?" he asked, his voice silky with arrogance. "Don't be shy. Prove your worth. Translate it." For a moment, Naomi felt the sting of humiliation. She heard the snickers, the whispers. "She's just a janitor. What is she going to do, mop the text clean?" But then something inside her shifted. That paper. She recognized it. The letters weren't meaningless scribbles. They were ancient Greek, flowing and sharp, the very language she had poured years of study into before her world fell apart. Her hand trembled slightly as she stepped forward, her mop bucket squeaking behind her on the tiled floor. The laughter dimmed as the room watched. She didn't ask for the paper. She didn't need to. Her eyes scanned the line, and her voice, soft at first but steady, filled the silence. "Even in darkness, knowledge is light." The words rang clear, translated with precision. No hesitation. No guesswork. The laughter stopped. Chairs shifted. Eyebrows arched. Ethan's smirk faltered for the briefest second before returning, tighter now, less certain. "Cute," he said, his tone dismissive. "Maybe you Googled it before." But his eyes betrayed him. He hadn't expected her to know. Naomi stood tall, mop in one hand, her other hand at her side, knuckles curled but steady. Her heart was racing, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "I didn't Google it," she said quietly. "It's Greek. I studied it. And Latin. And Arabic, too." The silence in the room thickened. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair and a skeptical frown, muttered, "How the hell does a janitor know ancient languages?" The words stung, but Naomi swallowed them down. She wasn't here to argue about her place. She had work to do. Still, she couldn't stop the bitterness from creeping into her chest as she turned back toward her mop bucket. She should have kept quiet. She should have let them laugh. But something about Ethan Sterling's smirk had lit a fire in her. As she wheeled her bucket toward the door, she heard the low murmurs ripple through the room. The word impressive floated in the air. Someone chuckled nervously. Another cleared his throat. But Ethan's voice, smooth and cool, cut across them all. "Don't get used to the attention," he said, almost lazily. "You're still the janitor." The words landed like a slap. Naomi paused, her back stiff, her fingers digging into the mop handle. She didn't turn around. If she did, they would see the storm rising in her eyes. She pushed it. Ed opened the door and left the boardroom in silence, the laughter gone, but the sting of humiliation sharper than ever. Outside, in the empty hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling glass, the city lights twinkled below. Naomi leaned against the wall for a moment, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. She wanted to scream. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself the same mantra she had repeated for years. "You are more than this. You are more." Back in the boardroom, Ethan leaned forward, fingers steepled under his chin. The smirk was gone now, replaced by a flicker of something else: curiosity, annoyance, maybe even unease. He didn't like being surprised. He didn't like being outmaneuvered, even in something so trivial. And Naomi Carter, the janitor he had tried to humiliate, had just shaken the ground beneath his perfect empire. The echo of laughter lingered in Naomi's ears long after she left the boardroom. She pushed her cart down the deserted corridor, her sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floor. With every step, She felt the sting of Ethan's words burrow deeper. "You're still the janitor." It wasn't the first time she'd been dismissed. People had looked through her for years. Customers at the diner she once worked in, professors who never knew why she suddenly stopped showing up to class, strangers who never bothered to learn her name. But something about Ethan Sterling's arrogance, the smugness in his eyes, made the words cut sharper. She gripped the mop handle so tightly her knuckles ached. For a moment she thought about wheeling her cart straight out of Sterling Tower, never looking back. But quitting wasn't an option. Her mother's hospital bills stacked like bricks on her kitchen counter back in Queens. And Naomi knew one thing better than any ancient text: survival required sacrifice. She turned the corner into the service hallway, where the bright glass and chrome aesthetic gave way to peeling paint and humming pipes. "Here," she allowed, and herself to exhale, the tears pressing at her eyelids finally slipping free. She brushed them away quickly, furious at herself for letting Ethan see even a hint of weakness. Back in the boardroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Ethan leaned back, twirling a Mont Blanc pen between his fingers. His board of directors, usually eager to nod along to every word, now exchanged curious glances. "Who was that girl?" asked Lawrence King, the silver-haired man who had muttered earlier. "How does a janitor translate Greek like it's nothing?" Ethan smirked again, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Luck, or a parlor trick. Don't read too much into it." But the room wasn't convinced. Margaret Cho, the only woman on the board, arched a brow. "Luck doesn't explain fluency. You tried to embarrass her, Ethan, and it backfired." For the first time in years, Ethan felt heat creeping up the back of his neck. He covered it with a cool laugh. "She's irrelevant. Let's get back to the merger numbers." The meeting limped forward, but the distraction was there. A janitor had done something none of them had expected. Hours later, Naomi was scrubbing the marble floors of the lobby when she heard the sharp clicks of expensive shoes approaching. She glanced up and immediately wished she hadn't. Ethan Sterling himself stood before her, his tailored coat draped over his arm, tie loosened, his gaze as sharp as it had been in the boardroom. "You," he said simply. Naomi's jaw clenched. She focused on the mop, sliding it back and forth, as if he were just another ghost in the tower. But Ethan wasn't used to being ignored. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the freshly polished floor. "Where did you learn that?" Naomi straightened slowly, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were tired but unwavering. "College, before life got in the way." "College?" His lips curled, as though testing the taste in. Is she of the word? "What were you studying? Janitorial arts?" Her chest tightened, but she refused to flinch. "Linguistics," she said, her voice firm. "I was 2 years into a degree, ancient languages, then my mom got sick and someone had to pay the bills, so here I am." Ethan blinked. For a moment there was no smirk, no sneer, just a flicker of something Naomi couldn't place. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. He chuckled, low and mocking. "So the maid has brains. Interesting." Naomi's blood boiled. She wanted to lash out, to hurl the mop at his polished shoes, but she didn't. She stood still, her breathing steady, her posture proud. "You think because I push a mop, I'm less than you," she said quietly. "But let me tell you something, Mr. Sterling. I've worked harder for scraps than you've ever worked for your billions, and nothing you say will take away what I know." For a heartbeat, the lobby was silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Ethan tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Then his smile returned, colder this time. "Careful, Naomi. Pride doesn't pay rent." He slipped his coat on with practiced ease and walked toward the revolving doors, his parting words echoing behind him. "But I do." The glass doors spun, and he was gone, swallowed by the New York night. Naomi stood frozen, her mop still in hand, her heart pounding. She hated him, hated his arrogance, his cruelty, his ability to make her feel both small and enraged all at once. And yet deep down, she sensed something dangerous. Ethan Sterling wasn't finished with her. And she wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her. Naomi's prediction was right. Ethan Sterling wasn't finished with her. The next morning, when she arrived for her shift, the receptionist, perfectly coiffed, tapping nails against her phone, barely glanced up before saying, "Mr. Sterling wants you on the 37th floor tonight. Special assignment." Naomi frowned. The 37th floor wasn't part of our route. That was executive-level territory, usually off-limits to janitorial staff except during late-night rotations. Her stomach tightened. She knew this wasn't about cleaning. By 10 p.m. the building was quiet. The usual shuffle of workers had thinned into silence, the glass tower glowing like a beacon above Manhattan. Naomi wheeled her cart to the elevator, rode it up, and stepped into a corridor lined with plush carpet and abstract paintings that probably cost more than her entire yearly salary. At the end of the hallway, a single door was ajar. The boardroom. She pushed it open cautiously. Ethan Sterling was inside, sitting at the head of the long table, sleeves rolled up, a decanter of whiskey at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, his lips curving into that infuriating half-smile. "You came." Naomi didn't step further. "I was told to. What do you want?" He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." "I have work." "This is your work tonight," he said smoothly. "Sit." Reluctantly, Naomi crossed the room and sank into the chair. Her posture was rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey and leaned back, studying her as if she were another acquisition he was considering. "I've been thinking about yesterday," he said finally. "About how you embarrassed me in front of my board." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "I didn't embarrass you, you embarrassed yourself." For the first time, Ethan chuckled, not cruelly, but genuinely amused. "You've got fire, I'll give you that." His eyes narrowed. "But I don't like losing. So let's raise the stakes." He slid a sheet of paper across the table. On it was another line of text, written in looping, faded characters. "Translate this." Naomi scanned it, her heart skipping. This time it wasn't Greek. It was classical Arabic, intricate, poetic, beautiful. The words stirred memories. Of late nights in the library, her notebook filled with translations and phonetic notes. She took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "The arrogance of kings crumbles before the truth of words." The translation hung in the air like a verdict. Ethan's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to succeed again. He masked it with a slow sip of whiskey, but Naomi caught the flicker of frustration in his eyes. "Where do you find these?" she asked. "Old manuscripts. I collect them. Symbols of power." Naomi tilted her head. "You don't understand them. You just own them." That struck a nerve. Ethan slammed his glass down harder than necessary, the sound reverberating across the polished table. "Careful, Naomi. You're a janitor, not a philosopher." Her voice didn't waver. "Knowledge doesn't care about uniforms. It belongs to anyone willing to learn." For a long moment, their eyes locked, hers steady with defiance, his icy with challenge. Finally, Ethan leaned back, smirking again, though it looked thinner now, forced. "Fine. I'll keep my word. Your pay's doubled." Naomi blinked. "What?" "You passed my little test. I said I'd double your pay." His tone was almost mocking, but there was a strange edge to it, as though he hadn't expected her to push him into keeping his promise. Naomi rose slowly, gripping the back of the chair. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity. It's wages earned. Don't flatter yourself. You're not special. You're entertainment." Her chest burned. "You're pathetic," she said quietly. "All that money, all that power, and the only joy you get is trying to break people." Ethan's smile vanished. His knuckles whitened around the glass. For the first time, Naomi saw something raw flicker in his eyes. Not cruelty, not smugness, but something darker. A shadow of vulnerability he immediately buried beneath a mask. "Get out," he said coldly. Naomi didn't hesitate. She turned on her heel, pushing the door open with a force that rattled the fee. "Rame." As she left, Ethan sat in silence, the words echoing in his head. "You're pathetic." He hated her for saying it. He hated her even more because a part of him feared it was true. The Sterling Tower glittered brighter than usual that night. Spotlights swept across the sky. Luxury cars lined the valet circle, and inside, the 37th floor pulsed with champagne flutes and the murmur of old money. Ethan Sterling's annual investor gala was the kind of event where power wore silk gowns and six-figure cufflinks. Naomi hadn't planned to be anywhere near it, but her supervisor handed her a revised schedule with a shrug. "Special request from upstairs. Sterling wants you on service duty for the gala." her stomach sank. She knew what that meant. Another spectacle. Another humiliation. By the time she wheeled her supply cart onto the executive floor, the party was in full swing. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with trays, laughter rippled against the backdrop of a string quartet, and the city sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows like spilled diamonds. Naomi kept her head down, moving quietly along the walls, collecting discarded glasses and napkins. But she felt his eyes before she saw him. Ethan Sterling stood near the center of the room, tall and commanding in a black tuxedo, ice-blue gaze trained on her with surgical precision. He raised a glass, murmured something to his investors, and then lifted his hand. The string quartet's music softened, conversations tapered, and a hush fell across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan's voice carried with practiced ease, "I'd like to offer you entertainment." Naomi froze. He gestured toward her, and every head in the room turned. "Our very own linguist in disguise, Miss Naomi Carter." A ripple of confusion and amusement passed through the crowd. Naomi's throat tightened, her hands gripping the handle of her cart until her knuckles ached. She wanted to run, but running would give him exactly what he wanted. Ethan held up a thin parchment, text scrawled in elegant faded ink. "Ancient Sanskrit," he announced, smugness curling around every syllable. "If our janitor can translate this, drinks are on me for the rest of the night." Laughter erupted. Glasses clinked. Naomi's pulse thundered in her ears. She stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate. Her heels clicked against the marble as she approached the parchment. Her eyes scanned the text, and despite the noise of the crowd, the world went still. She knew it. She knew it. Her voice rang out steady and clear. "The arrogance of men will always fall silent before the voice of truth." The room gasped. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the sound of champagne bubbles fizzing in crystal. Naomi handed the parchment back to Ethan, her chin lifted, her gaze unflinching. "Did I get it right?" The smirk slid off his face. His jaw tightened. His fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as he folded the parchment and slipped it into his pocket. "Correct," he said through clenched teeth. But Naomi wasn't finished. She turned to the glittering audience, her voice carrying like a bell. "I may wear a uniform, I may push a mop, but knowledge isn't defined by wealth. You don't have to own the world to understand it." A stunned hush swept through the crowd. Investors exchanged looks. Some frowned, others nodded, and a few even applauded softly before catching themselves. Ethan's face reddened, his icy mask cracking. "That's enough," he snapped, his voice colder than the marble beneath their feet. Naomi looked him dead in the eyes. "You wanted a show, Mr. Sterling. Here it is." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. And then, to everyone's shock, Ethan's mask shattered. His voice wavered, raw and sharp. "You think you're better than me?" His chest rose and fell unevenly, his composure unraveling. "You think ting dead men makes you superior? You know nothing about power, nothing about what it takes to hold this empire together." The crowd fell silent. Investors stared, wide-eyed. Ethan Sterling, always untouchable, always immaculate, was unraveling in front of them. Naomi's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. "You're right. I don't know what it takes to be you, but I know what it takes to survive without crushing people beneath my heel." For the first time in his empire of glass and steel, Ethan Sterling looked small, his fists clenched at his sides, his eyes wet with something he couldn't contain. And then, in front of his entire empire, Ethan whispered, not in control, not powerful, but broken. "I've spent my whole life trying not to be weak. And you make me feel like I already am." The confession hung heavy, cutting through the glitter and gold of the gala. Naomi stood frozen, the entire room holding its breath. In that moment, the balance shifted. The janitor stood tall, and the billionaire crumbled. The room buzzed with whispers after Ethan's outburst. Glasses clinked nervously, investors exchanged uneasy glances, and the string quartet faltered into silence. Naomi felt every gaze on her, but for once, she wasn't shrinking under the weight. She stood rooted, her shoulders square, her eyes steady. Ethan turned away, raking a hand through his perfect hair, his chest rising and falling like he'd run a marathon. He grabbed another glass of whiskey from a passing waiter and downed it in one swallow. But the damage was done. His carefully crafted image of composure had cracked before the very people who bankrolled his empire. Margaret Cho was the first to speak. "Ethan," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice the tension, "you just humiliated yourself." A murmur of agreement rippled across the room. Lawrence King shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." Ethan whipped around, his icy glare returning, but the effect wasn't the same. It wasn't command anymore. It was desperation. Naomi felt the eyes of the crowd shift back to her, waiting, perhaps even expecting her to crumble. Instead, she drew a breath, lifted her chin, and said quietly, "You wanted me to be a joke tonight, but I won't let you write my story for me." Her words weren't loud, but they landed with the weight of a gavel. One of the younger investors, a woman in a red silk gown, clapped softly. Others joined hesitantly, like testing the water. Within moments, the ripple turned into a wave. Applause filled the room, not thunderous, not unanimous, but enough to sting. Enough to mark the reversal of power. Ethan's face flushed, his jaw clenching as he struggled to hold his composure. Naomi turned, intent on leaving before he found another way to lash out. But as she wheeled her cart toward the door, a voice called after her, "Miss Carter?" She stopped. The speaker was none other than Richard Hale, one of Sterling Tower's largest investors, a man whose name often appeared in Forbes alongside Ethan's. Silver-haired, his presence commanded instant respect. He stepped forward, his gaze measured but warm. "You translated flawlessly. Do you still study?" Naomi hesitated, the weight of a dozen stares pressing against her back. She nodded once. "I used to, at Columbia. I had to leave when my mother got sick." A sympathetic murmur rose through the room. Ethan froze, his glass halfway to his lips. He hadn't known that. Richard's expression softened. "That's a shame. The world needs minds like yours." Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to being seen, not like this, not by people who usually glanced right past her uniform. Meanwhile, Ethan's grip on his glass tightened until his knuckles whitened. He was losing control of the narrative, of the room, of everything. The humiliation was spreading like wildfire, and he couldn't contain it. "Enough!" His voice cracked like a whip, desperate to reclaim authority. "This is my gala, my tower, my—" But the words trailed off under the weight of silence. No one was looking at him anymore. Their eyes were on Naomi. For the first time in his life, Ethan Sterling was irrelevant in his own empire. Naomi turned to him, her voice even, her gaze cutting through his fury. "You wanted to prove I was nothing. Instead, you proved how fragile you are." The words struck like a blade. Ethan staggered back half a step, the color draining from his face. He looked less like a billionaire titan and more like a man stripped bare, cornered and trembling. And Naomi, the janitor he had tried to humiliate, walked out of the room taller than she had ever felt in her life. The fallout came quickly. By the next morning, whispers about the gala were everywhere, on trading floors, in industry newsletters, even in gossip columns that rarely cared for corporate drama. Ethan Sterling, humiliated by his janitor. The words spread like wildfire. Inside Sterling Tower, the atmosphere was brittle. Assistants whispered behind closed doors, board members held hushed conversations in corridors, and Ethan himself was a storm contained in glass. His office door stayed locked, blinds drawn, his temper snapping at anyone who dared disturb him. Naomi, meanwhile, kept her head down. She scrubbed, polished, emptied bins as usual, though every glance she caught from passing employees felt different now. Some were pitying, some admiring, some calculating. For the first time, she wasn't invisible, but visibility felt like a dangerous fire. On her lunch break, she sat in the service lounge with a sandwich in her hands, staring blankly at the vending machine lights. That's when Margaret Cho appeared in the doorway. Naomi stiffened, nearly dropping her sandwich. Margaret, in her sharp navy suit, looked impossibly out of place among the chipped tables and humming vending machines. "May I sit?" Margaret asked. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. Margaret folded herself into the chair opposite, her gaze steady. "I want you to know, you weren't wrong to speak up. What Ethan did was cruel, And it exposed him more than it ever embarrassed you. Naomi lowered her eyes. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I couldn't let him keep treating me like nothing. Margaret's expression softened. Sometimes it takes someone brave enough to remind us what real value looks like. She paused, then added carefully, if you wanted, I could put you in touch with someone at Columbia. An old colleague. Perhaps your education doesn't have to end here. Naomi's breath caught. The offer glimmered like something too fragile to touch. She nodded once, unable to speak. Before Margaret could say more, the door slammed open. Ethan Sterling stood there, disheveled in a way Naomi had never seen, tie loose, shirt rumpled, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. Get out, he snapped at Margaret. Margaret didn't flinch. She rose slowly, smoothing her jacket. Careful, Ethan. You're on thin ice. Half your investors are questioning whether your arrogance has finally outpaced your genius. You'd be wise to remember that. She left without another word, heels clicking down the hallway. Ethan turned his glare on Naomi. Are you proud of yourself? He spat. You think you won last night? Naomi's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. I didn't win anything. I just told the truth. The truth? His laugh was bitter, jagged. You humiliated me, in front of everyone that matters. Do you know what that means for me, for this company? Naomi stood, her sandwich untouched, her eyes locked on his. Maybe it means they finally saw who you really are. For a moment, Ethan's mask slipped. His lips parted, his jaw trembled, and Naomi caught a glimpse of the boy beneath the billionaire, the boy still clawing for approval, still terrified of weakness. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the mask slammed back into place. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and venomous. Naomi picked up her bag, her hands steady, even as her pulse raced. No, Ethan. The only thing I regret is letting people like you make me feel small for so long. She walked past him, her shoulders square, her head high. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, rage and shame boiling beneath his skin. For the first time in his empire, he wasn't the one holding the power. And deep down, where no one could see, it terrified him. The weeks that followed carried a strange quiet. Sterling Tower still glittered above Manhattan, its glass windows reflecting the endless hum of the city, but inside, things had shifted. Ethan Sterling moved like a ghost through his own empire, attending meetings with clipped words, dodging calls from investors who wanted explanations, avoiding the gaze of employees who whispered as he passed. Naomi, meanwhile, found herself caught between two worlds. She still wore her gray uniform, still pushed her cart down the marble corridors. But the way people looked at her had changed. Some smiled now, some nodded, some even whispered thank you when no one else was listening. One evening, as she finished polishing the brass railings in the lobby, she saw Ethan standing near the revolving doors. He wasn't in his usual immaculate suit. His jacket hung loosely, his tie stuffed in his pocket, his face pale beneath the harsh lights. Naomi, he said softly. She almost kept walking. Almost. But something in his tone, not sharp, not mocking, but hollow, made her pause. He stepped closer, hands shoved in his pockets, his blue eyes raw. I owe you an apology. Naomi blinked, caught off guard. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. His voice cracked. I used you, mocked you, tried to crush you because I thought if I didn't make someone else feel small, I'd disappear. He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. My father raised me to believe weakness was a sin. Every time I looked at you, I saw someone who refused to bend, and I hated you for it. Naomi studied him in silence, the mop handle still in her hand. For the first time, she didn't see the ruthless billionaire. She saw a man stripped bare, trembling at the edges of his own shadow. You can't take back what you did, she said quietly. But you can decide who you'll be after this. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Then let me start here. He pulled an envelope from his coat and held it out to her. This isn't pity. It's a scholarship fund. Full tuition, Columbia, no strings attached. I already spoke to Margaret. She'll help you re-enroll. Naomi stared at the envelope, her pulse thundering. It felt unreal, like a door swinging open she had long stopped knocking on. Slowly, she shook her head. I won't take it if it's just about easing your guilt. Ethan's lips curved into a sad smile. It's not. It's about giving back something I never should have tried to steal from you. Naomi hesitated, then reached out and took the envelope. Her fingers brushed his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Thank you, she said finally, her voice steady. Ethan exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief. No, Naomi. Thank you. Months later, Naomi stood on the steps of Columbia University, the autumn air crisp, the campus alive with students rushing between classes. She adjusted the strap of her bag, heavy with textbooks, and caught her reflection in the library's glass doors. No uniform, no mop, just Naomi Carter, student, scholar, daughter, survivor. She smiled faintly, pushing the doors open, stepping into a future she had almost forgotten she deserved. Across the street, unseen by her, a sleek black car idled. Ethan Sterling sat in the back seat, watching her disappear into the library. He didn't step out, didn't call her name. He simply watched, a quiet ache in his chest. For the first time in his life, he understood that real power wasn't measured in towers or fortunes. It was in the courage to rise when the world tried to bury you. And Naomi Carter had risen higher than he ever could.